There is barely a headline today that does not involve Michael Cohen. First, the news this afternoon that he is suing the Trump organization. He says they owe him money for legal bills. Next, the allegations from the president's lawyer Rudy Giuliani that Cohen committed perjury when he told Congress he never sought a pardon from the president. And finally, word that New York law enforcement is investigating Trump's insurance practices, which Michael Cohen laid out a roadmap for last week.
To your knowledge, did the president ever provide inflated assets to an insurance company?
Yes.
Who else knows that the president did this?
Alan Weisselberg, Ron Lieberman, and Matthew Calamari.
Joining me, the founder of the DCReport.org and author of The Making of Donald Trump, Cay Johnston, and former Justice Department spokesman and MSNBC Justice and Security Analyst, Matt Miller. Matt, so Michael Cohen is suing the Trump organization. There is news that his lawyers initially, while they had a joint defense agreement, asked or inquired about a presidential pardon. What does that do with his credibility? Do you think he perjured himself while he was speaking to Congress last week?
Well, he absolutely has a credibility problem. He had one before he came to Congress, of course, because he's admitted that he lied in previous testimony. And I don't think this helps his credibility problem. I think, whether he intentionally lied or not, I don't think we know. But that's the standard for perjury. But his statement was absolutely false. I don't think there's any way you can square it. And I think the spin that Lanny Davis, his attorney, is putting on it now, that he really meant after July when he changed and started cooperating, I don't think holds up very well. That doesn't mean you can prove a perjury case, but I think it's without question that statement was false. Now, I think with respect to what that means about his testimony, I think just as the Southern District of New York did when it accepted his guilty plea and then later made allegations about the president in court, individual one. They don't make those allegations just because of Michael Cohen's testimony. And I don't think we should take Michael Cohen's testimony at face value, anything he says. You have to take his testimony, factor it into everything else we know, and then look to verify it at every step of the way. And I think that's what Congress should do and what other investigators should do as well.
Michael Cohen also was in front of House Intel again yesterday, and he came in with a number of suitcases, presumed to be documents that he intended to give over to the committee. One of those documents that he provided talks about his false testimony, or he says it's edits to his testimony, the original testimony he gave to Congress that was proven false. If there are edits there, edits either done by the lawyers or edits made by Donald Trump, will there be a real difference in how that's looked at if Donald Trump was involved or if the lawyers were involved? And again, we don't know what the edits are.
I think that is obviously a critical question. I think there are a few issues. Number one, the edits that Donald Trump's attorneys made, were they to the parts of the statement that ended up being false, or were they to something else and they made edits that changed the statement but didn't change it in a way that caused it to be false? I think there's a second question though, which is when they reviewed the statement, if the edits they saw, if the statement they saw contained the lie that he eventually pled guilty to, did those lawyers know it was a lie? I think if so, it wouldn't necessarily be a crime, but it would raise legal ethics questions for them. And the underlying question is, did the president see the testimony? Because he certainly, if he saw this testimony, he would have known that this statement about the timing of the Trump Tower Moscow negotiations wasn't true, because he was involved in those negotiations, or at least he was involved in being briefed by Michael Cohen by those negotiations. So again, we sort of know the general thrust of this, but getting the details both by acquiring testimony from the other people involved, maybe the other attorneys involved, or by actually looking at the edits that were made of the testimony is, I think, the way you sort out what actually happened here.
David, there seems to be no end to all of the avenues that are being pursued or might be pursued in the future when it comes to Donald Trump or his organization or the way he's done business over the past few decades. Now there's word that the New York Department of Financial Services is investigating him, and there were questions about him inflating or deflating assets in order to get favorable tax credits, or to get insurance claims or loans. What do you think of what Michael Cohen gave, in particular, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez last week, and what avenue do you think could be the most fruitful, potentially, for New York investigators?
Well, in the case of the Financial Services Department, that's a state agency that regulates banks insurance companies and insurance brokers, and that's who got the request for documents. Aon is an insurance broker. There are so many aspects of Donald Trump's cheating people, lying to the government, hiding records, trying to avoid audits, that it's a target-rich environment. It's such a rich environment. I can't tell you which is going to prove to be the ones that resonate with the public or that prosecutors find to be the most useful. If the state of New York decides ultimately to bring a case here, prosecutors, of course, will want to bring the most assured case they can win, not necessarily the biggest or most important case they could file.
How does Donald Trump and the organization, from your reporting over the years, operate in terms of inflating or deflating assets?
Oh, Donald has a long history of doing this. I'll give you a simple example. When he bought the old marine land property in Palos Verdes, California, where there's now a Trump golf course and clubhouse, part of the land was unstable. Palos Verdes Drive is shut down all the time because it's moving. And Donald was told he could not develop part of the land. Well, he, on the grounds that he couldn't do so, made a conservation grant and took a charitable deduction for this, presumably, and yet the land is worthless. It now has a driving range on it, so he shouldn't be able to do that. He claimed another piece of property. He said he took $100 million. He on his own account took $100 million as a gift for land that's probably worth less than a tenth of that. This is one of the reasons we need to have a thorough audit of Donald Trump's tax returns and of the inaugural committee's spending.
David Cay Johnston, we appreciate it. And Matt Miller, thank you guys very much. And up next, are we tired of winning yet?